right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is how this one daily habit quietly builds the life of your dreams. And as you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is first the overview itself, the one task rule, the winner's loop, the escalation effect, the review, and then your action items for the day or the next few days. Now, as always, if you want this document along with this training, make sure to join the free community from the link in the description. We also host free coaching calls every week in there. If you want to work with me one-on-one, then make sure to book a call from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on improving in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then as always, make sure to join the newsletter from the link in the description. Now, with that said and out of the way, let's get started and talk about the one task rule. So there's this thing that almost everybody gets wrong when they try to change their life. And honestly, I got it wrong for years as well. The default assumption is that transformation requires more habits, more routines, more goals stacked on top of each other, more discipline spread across a dozen different things all at once. And that assumption sounds reasonable on paper, right? Which is probably why so many people keep falling for it. But in practice, it often leads to this incredibly predictable cycle where you start strong on Monday, feel the weight of everything you committed to by Wednesday, and quietly abandon the whole project by the following week with nothing to show for it except another round of proof that you can't stick with anything. Now, the real issue really is that you're trying to do everything at once, and it creates this kind of decision fatigue or paralysis that actually makes you less likely to do anything at all. Your brain is essentially spending all of its energy just sorting through what to focus on. And the tricky part is that this paralysis often disguises itself as productivity or planning. You tell yourself you're getting organized or mapping things out while weeks go by and you haven't really done a single meaningful thing towards any of your goals. And the moment you accept that you only need to do one thing per day, there's this immediate drop in pressure that frees up the exact mental space you need to actually follow through on something. And if you just think about it honestly for a second, one thing done every single day for a year is 365 actions in one direction. That's more focused effort than most people accumulate in 3 years of scattered attempts at 10 different goals. And the principle that holds the whole thing together, and it's actually so simple that people tend to dismiss it right away, is to never have a 0 day. A 0 day is any day where you did absolutely nothing towards your goals, right? Not even the smallest possible action towards the thing that matters to you. Those 0 days are where stagnation typically takes root and starts growing, and one 0 day makes the next one easier to justify. And before you know it, you've gone through 3 weeks without doing anything, and the gap between where you are and where you want it to be has gotten enormous. Now, the bar for avoiding a 0 day is deliberately, almost ridiculously low. One set at the gym actually counts. One paragraph written counts. One difficult conversation you've been putting off counts. You're basically making it so that the only way to fail is to do literally nothing, which means even on your absolute worst days, you can still keep the streak alive, and that's all that matters. And those daily deposits really add up. You don't feel the compound effect day to day. That's just how compounding works. But somewhere around the 90-day mark, you start to notice that something real has been built. And it was built entirely out of days where you thought you barely did anything. So something else is that the act of moving forward, even in the smallest way, changes how you feel in real time. And I'm not talking about the results of the motion here. I'm talking about the motion itself, the moving and actually taking action on something. There's this very direct relationship between doing something purposeful and your emotional state shifting right there in the moment. And it works even when the action is small, even when you don't feel like doing it, even when the only reason you're showing up is to avoid a 0 day. And this is actually just how your brain is wired to function. When you take action towards something that matters to you, your brain releases dopamine during the process of actually working on it, not just when you cross the finish line. So the act of doing your one daily task is literally giving your brain the chemical signal it needs to feel engaged, motivated, and alive. And that's just how the reward system actually operates in our brains. And that creates a very real feedback loop where Action produces the feeling that makes more action easier to start. You don't need to feel motivated first. The motivation comes from doing the thing, not from waiting around for the right mood to show up. So most people have this completely backwards, and they spend weeks waiting for inspiration that's never going to arrive on its own. So if you think about any stretch in your life where you felt genuinely good and productive and on track, I bet it started with you just doing something, probably something small. The momentum built from there, right? And the good feeling followed the action. It didn't come first because it almost never comes first. And there's actual clinical research that confirms this whole dynamic in a pretty direct way. A 2006 study published in JAMA by Dimijian, I probably am butchering that name, but by Dimijian and colleagues, tested something called behavioral activation, which is essentially just getting people to do purposeful activities even when they feel terrible, against both cognitive therapy and antidepressant medication for moderate to severe depression. What they found was that simply getting people to take action, to do things on purpose regardless of how they felt, matched the results of medication. And I'm not talking about slightly, it matched, right? The mechanism they identified is exactly what we're talking about here. Action shifts your emotional state directly, not as a side effect or as a bonus, but as the primary pathway through which real change actually happens. There's also a well-known Harvard study from 2010 by Killingsworth and Gilbert, published in Science, where they tracked thousands of people throughout their daily lives and they measured when they were the happiest. And what they found was that the people that were most content when they were fully engaged in whatever they were doing, people were most content when they were fully engaged in whatever they were doing, even if the task itself was completely ordinary or unremarkable. And they were least happy when their mind was wandering, even if it was wandering towards something pleasant. So the takeaway lines up perfectly with everything we just covered. Purposeful motion, the act of actually being locked into something right now, is what shifts your state, not the quality of the task itself, not whether it's exciting or impressive, just the fact that you're doing it with intention. So you've got clinical psychology and neuroscience both pointing at the same conclusion from completely different angles. Action first, feeling second. And that's what the data consistently shows across multiple fields of research. And it's the exact foundation that makes the one task rule work the way it does. And honestly, the action doesn't need to be good. It doesn't need to be the right thing or the most strategic thing or anywhere close to perfect. It just needs to exist. A messy, half-hearted attempt in roughly the right direction will do more for you than a perfectly designed plan that stays in your head. Plans don't change your brain chemistry. Action, on the other hand, does. So give yourself full permission to do it badly, especially in the beginning. Your first attempt at anything is supposed to be rough. That's literally how learning works, right? The quality improves naturally over time as you keep showing up, but the key word here is keep showing up, or keywords here, which you won't do if you're holding every single attempt to some impossible standard from day one. There's also this thing where clarity only comes through action, not through thinking about action. You can sit around analyzing what you should do for months and stay completely confused the entire time. But take one imperfect step and suddenly the next step becomes obvious. You just have to take the first step most of the time. Reality gives you feedback and information that your imagination never will. And at this point, you might be wondering, okay, fine, one task per day, I get it, but what's the one thing? How do I pick? And the honest answer, especially if you're coming from a place where you haven't been doing anything consistently at all, is that it almost doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Any direction is better than no direction when you've been standing still for a while. So pick the thing that keeps nagging at you, the thing that pops into your head when you're lying in bed at night, the one that comes with a little pang of guilt or longing whenever someone else brings it up in a conversation. Most people, if they're really honest with themselves about it, already know what their one thing should be. They've known for a while, maybe even years. And the problem isn't really a lack of clarity, it's the lack of permission to commit to something that feels too small or too uncertain or too different from what they think they should, quote unquote, be working on right now. So your gut has honestly been running the calculations on this for longer than you realize. It's been processing everything you've seen and experienced and read and heard, and the answer it keeps serving up is probably more accurate than any pros and cons list that you could put together. So if you genuinely have no idea whatsoever, just pick something and give it 30 days of daily action, just one thing. 30 days will tell you more about whether this is the right direction for you than 30 days of thinking about it could. So you waste way less time if you just go in the wrong direction than if you just sit and plan on which is the right direction. And you'll discover that it fits or discover that it doesn't. And both of those outcomes are infinitely more useful than another month of standing still. So once you've got your direction, the next move is to narrow it down to the smallest possible daily action that still counts as forward motion. Not what you do in a perfect world with unlimited energy and zero distractions, the thing you can genuinely follow through on during your worst day, when you're exhausted, when you don't feel like it at all, when everything in your body is saying just skip today and start fresh tomorrow. And that minimum might be 5 minutes of focused work, 1 page of reading, 1 sentence written. It sounds absurdly small. And that's the entire point. Absurdly small means 0 excuses on any day ever. And doing something absurdly small is infinitely better than doing nothing, which is exactly what happens when the bar is set at 6 hours of deep work and you haven't done that once in the past month. So what actually happens in practice is that you almost never stop at the minimum. You sit down to write 1 sentence, for example, and 3 paragraphs come out before you even think about stopping. You do 1 set at the gym and then figure, well, I'm already here, and knock out 4 more. The minimum gets you in the chair and the momentum handles everything after that. However, this is a byproduct, right? This is not the goal. The goal isn't to always overshoot the minimum. What's important is to allow yourself to stop at the minimum if you need to. So let's just run the numbers for a second. 1 small action per day, let's say 15 minutes of focused effort towards one thing, that's about 7.5 hours per month of dedicated progress. Think about it. Over a full year, that adds up to roughly 90 hours. 90 hours of consistent, focused effort in one direction will put you ahead of essentially everyone around you who's been splitting their attention across a dozen goals and making 0 real progress on any of them. And the real power here isn't in the size of any individual action. It's in the repetition of it day after day after day. Most people have had those big productive days, those 12-hour marathon sessions where they've felt completely unstoppable, these all-nighters essentially. And then they did nothing for the next 2 weeks. One task every single day, 365 days in a row, will outperform these bursts so dramatically that comparing them honestly is unfair. And think of it the way compound interest works in a savings account. A small deposit made daily will eventually outgrow a large deposit made once. Your daily one task is that small deposit, and the skills, confidence, and momentum it builds over time are the accumulated interest growing on top of itself month after month after month. And most of this compounding is invisible for the first stretch, which is something that you just have to accept going in. The first month might not really feel like anything meaningful happened, right? The first 3 months might still feel frustratingly slow. But somewhere around the 6-month mark, the growth curve starts to bend in a way you can actually see and feel. And that's when you realize this ridiculously simple system has quietly built something that no amount of sporadic, scattered effort could ever have produced. And every single day you follow through on your one thing, you're also building a body of evidence about who you are, right? That evidence is eventually what shifts your sense of yourself from someone who's trying to change to someone who just does things. And that identity shift, I think, is the most important thing that can happen to you through this whole process. Once it takes hold, the behavior stops requiring willpower entirely. It just becomes what you do. And each completed day is basically a vote cast for the person you're becoming. So 1 vote on its own doesn't really mean much, of course. But 300 votes in the same direction over the course of a year creates something that your old patterns and old identity simply can't override that easily anymore, no matter how deeply ingrained they used to be. And at some point, the change becomes essentially permanent. You've done the thing so many times that skipping it feels stranger and more uncomfortable than just doing it. And that's when you know that the one task rule has fully done its job. Now, with that said, let's cover the winner's loop. So now that you've got your one daily action locked in, the piece that takes everything we just talked about and makes it significantly more powerful and is a force multiplier for everything we talked about is the winner's loop. At the end of every day, write down 3 wins. 3 things that happened today that you're counting as victories, regardless of how small they might seem. It might be I went to the gym even though I didn't want to. It could be I woke up before 8 o'clock. It could be I didn't check my phone for the first hour of the day. All of those count, right? Those absolutely count. And don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise. The reason this matters goes way beyond just feeling good about yourself, even though it definitely does that too. It's actually about training your brain to scan for evidence of progress instead of scanning for evidence of failure, which is what most people's brains do by default. Your brain is going to look for patterns either way. That's just what it does. If you spend every night thinking about what went wrong, it gets incredibly efficient at finding things that went wrong. Flip that habit around and spend every night reviewing what went right, and it gets equally efficient at spotting wins throughout your entire day. It's basically adjusting the filter on your experience of reality. The actual events of your day don't really change at all, but what you notice about them shifts dramatically. And what you notice is pretty much what you experience. So the exact same day, the exact same set of events can feel like a failure or feel like a genuine forward motion, depending entirely on which filter you're running when you close your eyes at night. And this is how you create unstoppable momentum, because momentum, to a big degree, is just perception. Over time, this new filter becomes your default setting. Instead of lying in bed replaying every mistake and missed opportunity, you're now lying in bed thinking about 3 specific things you did well. And that energy carries directly into the next morning and the next day and gives you a completely different starting point for the new day. And keep in mind that this shift doesn't just happen by accident, especially not in the beginning. Your brain has probably been running the negative filter for years, maybe decades at this point. Our brains are actually wired to scan for threats all the time to our survival, even though a lot of these so-called threats are non-existent in today's world. So flipping it takes deliberate, conscious effort for the first few weeks. But once that new habit locks in and starts running on its own, the whole thing becomes automatic and starts to change your daily experience pretty profoundly. Now, something kind of interesting happens after about 2 weeks of doing this consistently. Your brain starts actively chasing the feeling of being a winner at the end of each day. You'll actually notice yourself throughout the afternoon looking for opportunities to do things that you can add to your list later that night, which means you're unconsciously orienting your whole day towards progress without having to force yourself through every single decision. And there's this anticipation that builds up where you genuinely look forward to the end of day review. It stops feeling like a chore or a task on your to-do list and starts feeling like the moment you get to acknowledge yourself and what you actually did, which for a lot of people is honestly something they've never done consistently, and they don't have anyone in their life doing it for them in their entire life. And the impact of finally starting is way bigger than you'd expect. Eventually, the whole process runs on autopilot without you even really thinking about it. You're not forcing yourself to find wins anymore. You're just naturally noticing them as they happen throughout the day. And that automatic awareness of your own progress is absolutely addicting. You quite literally become addicted to progress. And there's this book called The Winner Effect by Ian Robertson that lays out the neuroscience behind all of this. And I think it makes a genuinely compelling case for why tracking wins works at a biological level. The core idea is that winning literally changes your brain chemistry. When you experience a win, any win at all, your brain releases a specific mix of testosterone and dopamine that make you more likely to win again afterwards. It's a biological feedback loop that reinforces itself with every repetition, and the part of that really matters is that it works regardless of how big or small the win actually is, because winning is a state of mind, so you can manufacture that state of mind. There is no objective truth to what a big win or a small win really is. It's all relative, right? So your brain doesn't distinguish between winning a major competition and just showing up to do your one task when you genuinely didn't feel like it. The neurological response fires either way. Your brain just registers win and adjusts your neurochemistry accordingly, which means, or your chemistry accordingly, which means that you can actually trigger this effect deliberately every single day using the smallest possible victories as your raw material. And you can literally manufacture a winner chemistry on purpose, and that's a real documented thing you can do starting today. By tracking your daily wins, you're essentially training your own neurology into a state where future winning feels expected and natural rather than rare. And once your brain starts expecting to win, your behavior also shifts to match that expectation without you having to consciously think about it or push yourself. It essentially becomes a confirmation bias towards winning. You're looking for wins, so you find wins. And these manufactured wins stack on top of each other over time. And sometimes they're not manufactured, they're actually wins. Day after day, week after week, your brain's baseline expectation of yourself rises steadily, and what used to require willpower starts to feel just like what you do. And that's the compound effect of the winner's loop applied consistently over weeks and months. And what all of this creates when you put the daily action and the nightly wins together is really an upward spiral that feeds itself and accelerates on its own. Confidence feeds action, action produces results, results feed more confidence, and the whole thing picks up speed once it gets moving without you needing to push harder. Compare that to the opposite spiral, because this is the alternative, guys, which is that most people are stuck in right now, right? Where inaction feeds doubt, doubt feeds more inaction, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be just keeps getting wider every single week. So the same mechanics, the same biological loops, completely opposite direction. And you get to choose which one you step into every single morning based on two simple things, right? Whether you do your one task and whether you write down your 3 wins at the end of the day. That's it. That choice is genuinely available to you right now, today, this evening. And making it consistently over time is the entire difference between the loop that slowly pulls you under and the loop that quietly builds something real and lasting underneath you. So start absurdly small with your wins. I mean, embarrassingly small. So small that if you told someone your win for the day was, I drank water first thing in the morning, they'd probably give you a look. That's completely fine. Let them. The person who's been tracking that kind of win consistently for 90 days straight has built something that the person giving them a look absolutely hasn't. And what they built is an unbroken record of showing up for themselves every single day and doing what they said they would do. That record is worth more than any single impressive sounding achievement. And the biggest thing standing between most people and actually starting small is their ego. And this is the biggest thing. It's comparison and ego, comparing themselves to others and ego. They want their goals and their wins to sound impressive when they say them out loud to others. So they set the bar way too high, hit it for maybe 3 days and miss it on day 4 and quit the whole thing entirely afterwards. Meanwhile, the person with an embarrassingly small daily goal is sitting on day 47 of a perfect streak, and their confidence is growing a little more every single night. So you're basically trading what sounds good for what actually works in practice. And in my opinion, that trade is worth making every single time without hesitation. Now, what's important for you to understand is that starting small doesn't mean you stay small. This is the big part. And maybe this is what will alleviate that ego addiction or validation from wanting to do just and setting big goals and wanting to do just big things all the time. The wins naturally escalate on their own as your confidence grows over the weeks and months. The person who started by just getting out of bed before 8 is doing a full morning routine by month 3, and they didn't force that escalation at all, right? Their identity just shifted gradually, and the bigger actions just started to feel like the obvious next natural step. And that's really the key to all of this. The growth isn't pushed from the outside, it's pulled from the inside by a genuine change in how you see yourself and what feels normal to you. Everybody you admire started like this. They started with these small goals that maybe felt a little bit of a reach at the time, but they were small nonetheless compared to where they are now. And they just naturally started increasing those goals over time. So treat every win like it matters, even the smallest one, in a genuine, honest acknowledgement. The moment you start dismissing your small wins as not real progress or not meaningful enough or not big enough compared to this and that person, you're right back to running the old filter that only sees what's missing. And that filter is exactly what kept you stuck in the first place, so don't go back to it. The people who build genuinely impressive lives, the one everybody looks at and wonders how they did it, they're almost never the ones who occasionally did something big. They're the ones who did something small with ridiculous, boring consistency over a long period of time. And that's a fundamentally different approach. And most people never even try it because of ego. Again, every small win you take the time to acknowledge is really a deposit in the bank of who you're becoming. And just like compound interest in an actual bank account, the early deposits always end up mattering the most in the long run because they're the foundation that everything else compounded on top of, right? Which means the wins you track this week might be the most important ones you ever track. So keep an actual written record of your wins, physically or digitally. It doesn't matter. Just put them somewhere you can watch the list grow over time. Mine are digital, but you can do it physically. Don't just think about them in your head and move on. The reason this part is so important is that there will absolutely be days, probably many of them, when you feel like nothing is working and you're not getting anywhere. On those days, you need to be able to look at a list of 200 documented wins and tell yourself, here's the evidence that I'm clearly moving forward, and let the evidence override whatever feeling is trying to convince you otherwise. Now, this record becomes your strongest tool against self-doubt and against any of that ego, right? Over the long run, when the voice in your head starts telling you that you're not making progress, you've got a tangible written list right there that says the exact opposite. So think of it as a safety net for your own psychology. You're building a case file that protects you from the inevitable low moments and waves of doubt that come with any worthwhile pursuit. Having that case file readily accessible means that you become the lawyer for yourself. It means that those low moments, that temporary dips, stay temporary dips instead of turning into reasons to quit everything you've been building. So make it a weekly practice to actually scroll through your wins from the last 7 days. And that 5-minute review, just 5 minutes once a week, will reinforce the identity shift more powerfully than anything else you could do. And the reason is simple. It's your own evidence. It's your own track record of the actions you actually took, proving that you already are becoming the person you set out to be. It's just confirmation. Confirmation bias working in your advantage. So making your progress visible to yourself in writing is one of the most underrated things you can do for sustained long-term change. Most people's progress is completely invisible to them. That's why when they start comparing their lives to other people, they feel like they haven't done anything. But you're seeing the wins of that other person because they're sharing them online, for example, and yours are nowhere to be seen. You don't document them in any way, whether it's digitally or physically or on social media. You're tracking none of it. So of course, when you compare your life to others, you're going to feel like you're doing absolutely nothing. They never write any of it down. They're relying entirely on memory to track how far they've come, and memory is terrible at this job. It's biased towards recent events and negative emotions and negative news, and it consistently underestimates how much you've actually accomplished over any meaningful stretch of time. Why is it biased towards recent events and negative emotions and negative news? Because it's looking out for threats all the time for your survival, even though those threats don't necessarily exist nowadays. A written record is objective. It doesn't care about how you're feeling today or whether you woke up in a bad mood. It just shows you the facts. And the facts accumulated over a period of months will almost always tell a significantly more positive story than your feelings alone. A year from now, that record will contain well over 1,000 documented wins if you do at least 3 per day. The person who wrote those early entries, the ones from the first week, will feel like a completely different human being from the person reading them back 12 months later. That gap between who you were when you started and who you've become is the clearest, most undeniable evidence that this whole system actually works. And the craziest thing is when you look at your wins from 3 years ago or 5 years ago, if you keep this habit up, you'll be completely surprised at where you were and where you are now. And you'll realize that those moments where you felt like nothing is working eventually turned into something that actually worked. And you'll stop doubting yourself so much. You'll stop doubting in those low moments, because everyone has those. Even the most successful people on planet Earth have those low moments, but yet they know what they've done during their life and they remind themselves of it. And it's crazy when you're able to actually go back and look at all these small wins that you wrote 5 years ago, those small private victories essentially that you had and nobody knew about. Only knew about them back then. And you thought they're small, maybe. You thought that you didn't know if things are going to be working out, that you didn't know if things are going to work out in your favor in the future. You just wrote those down because you wanted to just pat yourself on the back, even though you're not where you wanted to be. You wrote them down to acknowledge yourself. And looking at those 5 years later, It's kind of insane. It's an insane experience that it's kind of unexplainable. But you'll see, if you keep this habit up, you'll see what I mean by that. And your confidence will really, really grow just because of that. So, what happens once you've been running the one task rule and the winner loop together for a while? The escalation effect. The escalation happens on its own. You don't have to plan for it or schedule it or set bigger goals through sheer force of will. What actually happens is that your sense of yourself shifts so thoroughly and so fundamentally that the small daily actions start to feel too small. But this time it's not because of ego or because somebody told you to aim higher or because you read some article about thinking bigger and setting 10x goals. It happens because you've genuinely become someone who operates at a different level now, and the old minimum just doesn't match who you are anymore. And this is the most natural form of growth you will ever experience. It's not driven by anything external. It's pulled forward by a real earned change in who you see yourself as. That happened gradually through all those daily tasks and nightly wins you've been building up. The person who started by getting out of bed at 8 doesn't have to discipline themselves into waking up at 7 now. They just do it because they know they can, because they have a body of evidence that they've done it for a year straight, right? So along with that shift, the friction that used to come with the daily action starts fading away too. Things that took real noticeable effort in month 1 become almost automatic by month 3, which frees up mental energy and willpower for whatever naturally comes next. Now, most people are genuinely pleasantly surprised by how quickly this shift actually happens once it starts. They go in expecting change to be slow and grinding and painful for a really long time, and then they look up after 60 days and they realize they're doing things that they thought were months away, simply because consistent daily action moved them forward faster than they would have predicted. And on top of that, they've been tracking their wins, which just compounded the effect of winning every single day and the momentum they had. So each day you complete, like we talked about earlier when we covered building evidence, puts you one notch forward. And you can't really slip below that notch anymore because the accumulated proof is too strong for your old patterns to overwrite. You'll still have off days here and there, and that's completely normal and expected, but your floor keeps rising week by week, which means your worst days 6 months from now will honestly look better than your best days did back when you first started doing any of this. And that rising floor changes the entire game because now you're not fighting every day just to maintain some shaky baseline. The baseline goes up on its own while you stay focused on the simple daily actions. Now, the forward motion you've stored up by that point is so strong and strong enough to absorb real setbacks without falling apart. Bad weeks, unexpected problems, life throwing something difficult at you out of nowhere, none of it puts you back at the beginning anymore. You've built up too much accumulated progress and evidence for any single disruption to erase what you've created. So real growth, the kind that actually lasts and changes your life, looks more like a staircase than a straight line when you zoom out on it. So each step feels hard while you're on it. You're uncomfortable. You're not totally sure if you can actually sustain this new level. You're wondering if maybe you've pushed too far too fast, but then you settle in after a few weeks. It becomes your new normal, and the next step starts looking natural, even though just a month ago it would have seemed completely out of reach. And each new step gives you a perspective you simply didn't have before. You're literally higher, right? You're standing higher. So you can see further. You understand more about what's actually available to you and what you're actually capable of. And the steps below you, the ones that felt so hard and so uncertain at the time, looks almost trivially easy from where you're standing right now. And that accumulated perspective also teaches you something really valuable about trusting the process and yourself when things feel difficult and uncertain. You now have an actual track record of handling steps that seemed impossible when you were standing at the bottom of them, which gives you a completely different relationship with difficulty going forward. Hard stops meaning that you should quit and starts meaning that you're most likely growing, and you start to love it. You start to become addicted to hard things. It's genuinely worth pausing every now and then to look back at where you started and honestly just take in how far you've actually climbed even if you're not where you want to be. Not as an excuse to slow down or stop, but as fuel for the next step. Because recognizing your own progress and giving yourself credit for it is not supposed to slow you down. It's only supposed to slow you down if you think this is it, right? It's one of the most powerful things you can do to keep making more progress. And most people skip it entirely because they're too focused on the distance still ahead of them. And I'd add that this kind of honest reflection also really helps on the hard days, and there will be hard days no matter how consistent you are. Being able to specifically remember what you were struggling with 3 months ago, things that now feel completely effortless, gives you a very grounded, very real sense that whatever you're struggling with today is equally temporary. Now, I'll be honest with you, this whole approach requires patience, which I know isn't really what anyone wants to hear, but the staircase approach, the gradual one, builds something that holds up under real pressure and real adversity. The change everything overnight approach builds something that falls apart the very first moment life gets complicated, which it always does, and most of the time it just simply doesn't work. And if you've tried it in the past, you already know this. You've already tried to change everything overnight. How far along did it get you? Probably not too far. So slow growth is honestly the only kind that actually sticks around permanently. And the reason is that it gives your identity enough time to catch up with your behavior. Quick external changes with no internal shift underneath them always snap back to the original pattern eventually. Slow identity-driven change stays because the person making the change has genuinely fundamentally become someone different from who they were before. And every day you spend building gradually instead of rushing everything and looking for shortcuts that never work, you actually take a lot longer. It wastes a lot more time looking for shortcuts than actually just doing the boring work. Every day you actually spend building gradually is a day that strengthens the foundation underneath everything else. And a strong foundation means you can build as high as you want to later on without worrying about the whole structure collapsing under its own weight. And each level of escalation also does something else. It expands what you believe is actually realistic and possible for you in a very concrete, evidence-based way, where you can point to specific things you've done in the last few months that you previously would have said were beyond your reach. And that updated belief system built on real proof becomes the foundation for even bigger things going forward. So your track record becomes the thing you check against whenever a new challenge or opportunity shows up in your life, because every difficult situation will automatically get compared to what you've already handled and gotten through. And when your history includes months of consistent daily action, tracked wins, and a natural escalation, most new challenges just start to look surprisingly manageable by comparison to what you've already done. And this is basically a permanent recalibration of your internal difficulty scale. Things that would have felt 10 out of 10 difficulty a year ago now register as maybe a 5 or 6. They haven't actually gotten any easier in any objective sense. You've just got significantly more capable, and that recalibration of how you perceive difficulty doesn't go away once it's happened. That's why I like to say that the more capable you become, the more you become capable of. And the effects of this expanded belief system go well beyond the specific goal you originally started working towards, because once you prove to yourself that you can genuinely transform one area of your life through consistent daily action and wins, you will automatically start seeing the same possibility in every other area too, right? Because you've just been tracking it for a year. You know you can do it, essentially. So your actual potential, whatever that really turns out to be, isn't something you can figure out in advance by sitting in a room and thinking about it. It's something you uncover piece by piece through doing. Each day of consistent effort reveals a little bit more of what you're truly capable of, which means the one task rule isn't really just about building one single habit in one area of your life. It's about gradually revealing a version of yourself that genuinely doesn't exist yet from where you're standing right now, but it will. So the limits you're imagining from your current position are almost definitely way lower than your real ceiling. And I can say that with a lot of confidence because almost everybody underestimates themselves at the starting line. And honestly, in general, the only way to find out where your actual ceiling is to start climbing and keep going long enough to see what opens up. The escalation doesn't stop unless you personally decide it stops. There's always a next level. There's always a bigger version of you, of whatever you're building. There's always a new capacity to grow into that you couldn't even see from the previous step. And I'm not saying this as pressure to always be pushing. I'm just making you a promise that this game stays interesting and rewarding for as long as you choose to keep playing it. So to zoom all the way out now, you start with one task per day, like we talked about at the beginning. You track 3 wins every night, which triggers the winner's loop. Your confidence starts rising steadily. Your identity shifts over the weeks and months, and the escalation happens naturally on its own without you having to force it. You set bigger goals and you actually hit them, and then at some point, maybe 6 months in, maybe a year, you look around at your life and it's genuinely, noticeably different from where you started. And the whole thing, every bit of it, traces back to that very first day when you decided to just do one small thing. Most of this transformation is completely invisible to the people around you until suddenly, all at once, it isn't. They see the results when they finally become obvious, but they didn't see the 300 days of one task and 3 wins that built the entire foundation underneath those results. They'll probably call it luck or natural talent or good timing because that's easier to process than the truth, which is that you simply showed up with more consistency than they were willing to. And the truth of how this works is really genuinely unglamorous. It's really just doing the thing at 6 in the morning, for example, when absolutely nobody is watching or caring for years and years. It's the journal entry that nobody will ever read, sometimes not even you, right? It's the one set of push-ups on the day you had 0 energy and every reason to skip it. Those invisible, unwitnessed moments are where everything that actually matters gets built. And they only happen because you committed to a system simple enough to sustain through literally anything life throws at you. So let your own record be the proof, your own documented, written list of daily actions and daily wins accumulated over months, proving to you and to anyone paying attention that the most powerful thing in personal development isn't talent or luck or perfect timing or being born in the best family. It's consistency. It's applied consistency patiently to one thing that actually matters to you over a long enough time to let the compounding do its quiet, steady work. And the life you build through this process, the person you become along the way, extends well beyond just your own experience. It becomes a real, visible example for the people around you, whether they're watching closely or just noticing from a distance. When someone sees a normal, regular person transform their life through something as simple and accessible as one daily task and 3 nightly wins, it makes the whole thing feel genuinely possible for them too. And that ripple effect goes so much further than you'll ever actually know, because the person who watches you show up every single day might never say a word to you about it, but your consistency quietly becomes their permission to start doing the same thing in their own life. And their transformation creates another ripple and another after that, all of them tracing back eventually to the day you decided that one task per day was enough to begin with. So start today, not tomorrow morning, not next Monday, today. Just pick your one thing, do it, write down 3 wins before you go to sleep tonight, and then wake up tomorrow and do it all again. That's it. It's almost offensively simple, and I'm telling you right now, it works. With that said, let's cover the review. We talked about the overview, the one task rule, the winner's loop, the escalation effect, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. First, pick one task that moves you towards the thing that matters most to you right now and commit to doing it every single day with a bar set low enough that you can actually follow through even on your worst, most exhausted, least motivated day of the year. Don't set big goals. I'm telling you, this is a trick of your brain so that you don't do anything. Then write down 3 wins every night before bed, no matter how small they seem to you in the moment, and keep a running written record you can go back to whenever self-doubt shows up trying to convince you that you're not getting anywhere. And finally, let the escalation happen on its own by staying consistent with your daily task and your nightly wins, knowing that the identity shift will carry you towards bigger goals and bigger actions naturally, without you ever having to force it. With that said, as always, if you enjoyed this training, make sure to join the free community from the link in the description if you want to get the document. If you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call, again, from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on improving in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then make sure to join the newsletter from the link in the description. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for the support, and I'll see you in the next one.